We're working our way through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And last week we talked about Jesus' teachings on anger and adultery and divorce, and we saw Jesus doing two things. First, he was radicalizing the commands of the law of Moses, stressing that his way is even more intense than that of the scribes and Pharisees, even more demanding. And second, especially with the teachings on adultery and divorce, he radicalized the existing commands in a way that protected women and encouraged men to stop abusing their power. Our teachings for today can be summed up very simply. The first one says to tell the truth. The second one, don't retaliate. And the third, love your enemies. As we think about how to respond to those who do us wrong, we'll wrestle with how practical these commands actually are, especially the last two. But these are not given to us as a wise strategy for besting our enemies. Love is the strategy, foolish as it may be. But this shouldn't surprise us too much, because the cross is foolish, and grace is foolish too. First teaching. Jesus says, "You have heard it said of those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely, but carry out the vows you have made to the Lord. But I say, do not swear at all. Your word should be yes, yes, or no, no." So what is this about? In ancient Israel, if you wanted to assure someone you were telling the truth, you offered an oath, often in God's name. And if you bought some land or some goods at the market, you might seal the transaction by saying, "In the name of Yahweh," in the name of God. It was a way of guaranteeing that both parties were telling the truth, that this was going to be fair. And we still do this today. We are placed under oath when we're in court. If we're trying to assure someone of our story, we might say, "I swear on my mother's grave," right? The problem, though, is that people can still lie under oath. One of the 10 Commandments is, "You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God." And it's not talking about vulgar language. It's trying to prevent lying in the marketplace. If you swear in the name of Yahweh that this is the best ram in your herd of sheep, then it had better be the best ram in your herd of sheep, or God will judge you. And what Jesus is saying is, we don't need all the oaths. Spare me the big show, okay? Just tell the truth. Just hold to your word. Not bad advice, no matter what we're trying to sell, whether it's a used car, our side of the story, or the religious life. Just tell the truth. Nothing more, nothing less. The second teaching always generates a bit more resistance in us. "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs. Lend to anyone who asks." Now, the different examples are about some different things. The last one has to do with abundant generosity. But the main point of these examples is don't retaliate. This is extremely difficult. Striking back is a natural part of who we are. I see this side of our nature on display every single day at my house, without fail. Simon will be playing cars. Lightning McQueen will be reenacting the big race with King and Chick. And Ruthie will sneak up very carefully and grab one of the cars and run. At this point, Simon has a few choices. He can, A, decide to race with just 2 cars. He can, B, go over to his parking garage and invite one of the other 40 cars to join in the race and have 3 cars once again. Or he can, C, jump up, race after Ruthie, push her down, and start smacking her around. C is always the preferred option. Every time. Ruthie took what's his, and it's an attack on his very soul. Simon's 5. That car isn't just one of his toys. He is that car. Everything in his world is him. It's an attack on him. The attack hurt. he's sad. And he wants Ruthie to know how much sadness he feels. He wants her to know how much he hurts. In that split second that his mind is thinking through its options, every time the most appealing strategy for communicating his feelings to Ruthie is to chase her, catch her, and then use violence. Well, then what? Ruthie cries. Simon grabs his car, goes back to racing. Simon has communicated his hurt, and now Ruthie feels hurt. In fact, she feels acute physical pain. But Ruthie doesn't get the message that Simon was trying to send. Instead, Ruthie thinks, Simon hurt me for no reason at all. As soon as Ruthie dries her tears and receives the needed comfort from Mom and Dad, she wants Simon to know how much sadness she feels. She wants Simon to know that she hurts. A few minutes later, Ruthie will sneak up on Simon and grab 2 cars. Or just drop a big book on his head. And we expect a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old to act this way, but adults act this way too. I act this way. I'll come home for the day with some bee still in my bonnet, upset about something, and when the Royal Rumble breaks out and the screaming's at a fever pitch, instead of going in and listening patiently to expressions of hurt and being upset, the 5-year-old in me takes over, and I want to teach him a lesson. And so I go in to communicate my hurt, because all I wanted was some peace and quiet, and I'm not getting it, and I'm sad. So I go in and I start yelling, and I say, if you don't sort this out now and don't be quiet, I'm never going to read a book to you ever again or do anything fun or ever feed you, ever. I've communicated my hurt, but they hear a different message, which is, Daddy doesn't want to be with me, or Daddy is a big angry gorilla. And you can be guaranteed that Simon will want to communicate his hurt to me by fighting with me over every little thing, ending with brushing teeth before bed for the rest of the night. A while back, I remember riding in a car with a friend of mine, clergy colleague, he's a good friend, and we were talking about the wars that were going on. It was just when the Obama administration was getting ready to announce a withdrawal strategy for Iraq. And we were talking about all the issues surrounding the war, whether our presence was providing security, whether it was inflaming tensions, what are our responsibilities to the Iraqi people, what are our interests as a nation, our interests as communities. We were talking through the whole thing. And then my friend said to me, at some point someone has to stop fighting. Shouldn't it be us? And it stopped me, the statement did. I thought, that's so simple, so uncompromising. That is so Sermon on the Mount, I thought in my head, as to ethic of the Sermon on the Mount. And it's true, to stop our fights or to keep them from starting, someone has to be willing to be harmed and not fight back. Or to decide that out of love and respect for the other, they aren't going to hurt in response. Jesus is asking for a more mature response from us. We're being asked for a more helpful way of communicating, hey, I don't like being treated that way. I didn't feel respected when that happened to me. And sometimes Jesus is just asking for sacrifice. And that's hard. Not retaliating feels weak. It is weakness. It's letting go. It's mercy. It's the way of the cross. Well, every once in a while at our house, the cycle of retaliation gets broken. Sometimes it doesn't start. If Simon's playing with cards, there's no chance. But if he's doing something else, like drawing a picture, then we have a shot. So Simon's drawing a picture, he has his colors, he's working hard. Ruthie creeps up like a cat at the bird feeder and then swipes one of his colors, scribbles all over his paper, and then runs off. And Simon looks at his paper, but this time he says, oh, Ruthie, and grabs another piece of paper and another color and starts to color. And Ruthie's off, and then she kind of forgets it and starts playing with something else. And there's peace in the house. The cycle of retaliation didn't start. There's peace for a while. At some point, we have to be willing to sacrifice our pride and for the good of the other, not fight back. The final command of Jesus is similar to rain. Jesus says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus didn't make up the command to love your enemy. It's found in the book of Leviticus, so he's commenting on Hebrew law here. But that command has, for centuries, for millennia, raised the question, well, who's my neighbor? Who is really my neighbor? How far does this extend? And can I just love the neighbors on my block? Because I really like everybody on my block. They're all nice people. There's some meanies across the street. I don't love them, but am I covered if I just love those on my block? But Jesus tells us that neighbor love must extend to our enemies, to those who hurt us, to those Jesus has just told us not to retaliate against. I watched the movie Invictus again this week. Sarah hadn't seen it, so she picked it up. I've talked about Invictus before, but it's such a powerful story, and I can't not talk about it when I see it. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's the story of Nelson Mandela, just as he's begun serving as president in post-apartheid South Africa, and he's trying to pull the nation back together. And he does so in part by focusing on the rugby team and the World Cup that's coming up, and encouraging and inspiring the rugby team to win the World Cup as a source of shared pride for the nation. But ultimately, he pulls this country together with a dogged determination to love the whole of South Africa, the native people with whom he fought for justice, and the whites who oppressed him and who are fearful of him now. Love for the enemy is his strategy. It's the only thing that will keep his country from spiraling into violence and civil war. Now, the native South Africans think he's foolish, and the whites still don't trust him. But Mandela stays focused on this goal and makes amazing progress. 2 lines from the story have stayed with me. One is said by the captain of the rugby team, and he says, "How does a man who's been in a jail cell for 30 years come out ready to forgive those who put him there?" And the other line is from Mandela himself, who says, "You must forgive. Forgiveness takes away fear. That's why it's such a powerful weapon." Refusing to retaliate and loving your enemies is not conventional wisdom. It's not the well-worn path. But it is the path we must take if we're going to live in harmony with one another. It's part of the demanding way of Jesus. As we follow Jesus, we will see him redefine strength and power as that which gives itself for the sake of another, as that which sacrifices itself for the sake of another and the world. This way of love is difficult, but it is the strategy of the realm of God, and it is our hope. May it be so. Amen.